Hi, Susan Yasui here. So, I have another chapter for you here for my YouTube channel. And at this point, I have finished the stories that my daughter experienced as a child. And now I'm telling about my own stories. So, this one is entitled September 17th. You'll see in a minute why that was an important day. So, I lost my husband nearly 5 years ago, just as the coronavirus lockdown started in the US. We already had our flight arrangements, our home sold, everything moved to suitcases, in storage, or the trash bin. He had a stroke, which the doctor said was from his heavy smoking for so many years. The stroke brought deformity to his body, and he continued to weaken, passing away as the last flights to Japan were being stopped. We were going to work with a longtime friend in Shiga, Japan, at his English school, but losing my Japanese husband left me with no visa into Japan. Our friend then applied to sponsor me into the country so I could teach English in his school. My husband and I had owned and run an English conversation school in Hiroshima for many years, so the government would have approved our request, except that no Americans were allowed into Japan at that point of the pandemic. I needed to honor my husband's wishes to have his remains returned to his family cemetery in the Hiroshima countryside. There was so much to handle about his affairs once he passed before leaving the US, but when I was ready to leave, I petitioned the Japanese government to approve my visa into the country so that I could deliver my husband's remains to his home. I only had to provide 2 documents about his passing, his death certificate and his last will, stating his wishes to be returned. With the paperwork done, my petition was approved, including the okay to work for my friend in Shiga. I was the only American on that airplane. There is another long story as to what it took to get my husband's remains to Hiroshima from Shiga, with the COVID virus still a factor, but I'll tell that one later. This story is about September 17th. That is the day that I could finally return to my husband's hometown and visit his gravesite. I missed the actual ceremony, having fractured my ankle and in the hospital the day of the service. Unable to get approval from my doctor to leave the hospital, I cried for 2 days. You know, the only reason I finally stopped crying was because I heard mention of the medical staff giving me some sort of medicine to help my depression, which of course I want nothing to do with such medicine because I've heard of their horrible side effects. But anyway, so I stopped crying, so I didn't have to take some special medicine. My sister-in-law did a wonderful job of videoing all that happened, though. I got to see how a Japanese funeral service is held, although to me it was the worst possible thing not to be at the funeral of my husband of 37 years. Finally, it was arranged with me out of the hospital and able to walk to visit the gravesite. So on September 17th, my husband's younger brother and his wife drove me out to the countryside. This was an incredibly beautiful experience for me. It is a long drive up into the mountains and through the massive rice fields, but about an hour before we reached the homestead, I started to recognize things. Parks, the grocery store in another city, bigger than what was in their little town. It had been 25 years since I'd been there. We lived in Hiroshima City earlier, and we would head out to the family rice fields often to help with the planting, tending to, and harvesting the acres of rice. The memories as the car sped along toward my husband's gravesite were flashing through my mind as so many things began to look familiar. I began to feel so good, though. These were wonderful memories, and I was somehow able to connect to those wonderful times again without the stress of loss. Finally, as we turned left off the narrow road onto the long driveway, I saw the big, expansive house at the top of the drive. Wow. You know, That house is just amazing to me. It sits way above these layers and layers of rice fields. It's so beautiful. These old farm homes are nothing like the tiny Japanese spaces in the big Japanese cities. This house had 4 generations living in it the last time I'd visited it. But you know, now it was only down to 1 person. My sister-in-law's husband passed away over 10 years ago, and all 3 kids were grown now and moved away, and my husband's parents and grandparents had all passed away by now too. And there she was, all alone in that big house. She was still working locally, and a local organization was farming her land for her, so she was managing life too. I was surprised at how much my sister-in-law looked the same after 25 years. Must be the Japanese food. I don't know. Anyway, we pulled up to the house before walking to the gravesite. Still, the memories were flooding in. The first surprise was seeing a large painting by my sister, still hanging in the entrance. My sister gave me that painting 50 years ago. An old brother had borrowed it when we left for America years earlier. Now, borrowed it means he pulled it out of the storage items that we had in a little back house on their property. Such an odd place to see her painting, since she had passed long ago too. Yet a piece of her was there in a faraway land she had never even been to. We took the short walk to a path leading to the home cemetery out in the country farming area. Farming family cemeteries are often right on their own property. Then I saw his gravesite. It was so beautiful out in the open air expanse of a mountainside with flowers and trees and white puffy clouds in the blue sky. I felt such at peace. I felt such at peace standing in front of my husband's resting spot. I felt the overwhelming peace from him too. It was as if he had been waiting for me to finally stand in that very spot. Thank you for listening.